racist store manager made a huge mistake when he forcefully removed a black veteran from his store, completely unaware that legendary actor Morgan Freeman was watching the entire thing unfold. What happened next? And how did Morgan Freeman, a veteran himself, react to such blatant disrespect? It was a calm Friday afternoon at Everyday Essentials, where the rhythmic beep of price checkers and the soft squeak of shopping carts filled the air. The store had a steady flow of customers, creating the perfect low-key shopping atmosphere. Among them was James "Jimmy" Carter, a distinguished black veteran in his late 60s. He carried himself with quiet dignity as he pushed his shopping cart through the aisles, his army uniform proudly displaying rows of badges, each one a testament to years of dedicated service to his country. But despite his proud stature, Jimmy wasn't seeking special treatment, just the respect he had rightfully earned. Jimmy had one mission that day, picking up essential items for his bedbound wife, Lucille. His shopping list wasn't extravagant: adult diapers, medical supplies, hygiene products, each item representing the daily challenges they faced together. Since retiring, they had been relying on their savings and Social Security, making every purchase a careful decision. But Everyday Essentials had always been a lifeline, offering veteran discounts that helped stretch their tight budget. As he turned into what he thought was the hygiene aisle, Jimmy suddenly stopped. Something was off. The shelves, once familiar, had been completely rearranged. Confused, he frowned. Why do they always have to change everything? He muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. His once efficient shopping routine was now a struggle, forcing him to wander through unfamiliar aisles, trying to make sense of the chaotic new layout. Was this just a management shakeup? Or some kind of strategy to push certain products? Whatever the reason, it wasn't making things any easier. As he searched for the items on his list, Jimmy's thoughts drifted back to Lucille, waiting alone at home. She had been his rock through the darkest times, helping him battle the memories of war that never fully faded. Now, it was his turn to take care of her. He couldn't imagine leaving her alone, not after everything they had endured together. His search took longer than expected, and by the time he finished, he found himself near the fresh produce section. The colorful fruits and vegetables caught his attention, banners and sales tags promising great deals. Despite his financial struggles, Jimmy hesitated for a moment, tempted by the thought of bringing Lucille something fresh and nutritious. Carefully, he picked out a few items: a pint of strawberries, a handful of crisp apples, some leafy greens, and a small pack of lean poultry. As he placed them in his cart, he noticed something: the produce actually looked fresher than usual. At least they're improving something, he thought, trying to find a silver lining in the day's frustrations. But reality hit him fast. Every extra dollar spent on these treats could mean sacrificing something more essential later. Standing there, one hand on his cart, the other rubbing his chin, Jimmy debated whether to keep them. Finally, he made a decision. He'd take everything to the cashier, apply his veteran discount, and see how much it all added up to. Maybe, just maybe, today was a day they could afford a little extra. A small moment of joy in the middle of life's everyday battles. But Jimmy had no idea that his day was about to take an unexpected and shocking turn. And neither did the store manager, who was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, with Morgan Freeman watching every second of it. With his cart now full, Jimmy made his way to the checkout, completely unaware that his routine shopping trip was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test his dignity, resilience, and faith in the very country he had served so proudly. As he approached the register, a familiar, friendly face greeted him. Meline, or Maddie, as she preferred, was one of the store's kind-hearted cashiers, someone Jimmy had come to know through his weekly visits. Seeing her was a welcome relief, offering the first real human connection he'd had all day. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter," Maddie said with a warm smile as he began unloading his cart. "How are you today? And how's Lucille?" Jimmy's face softened at the mention of his wife. "Afternoon, Maddie. I'm doing all right, thank you. Lucille's hanging in there. It's been a tough week, but she's a fighter." Maddie nodded as she scanned the first few items. "She's lucky to have you, Mr. Carter." I hope these supplies make things a little easier for both of you. Jimmy watched as she scanned the fresh produce he had carefully selected. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Maddie, could you check today's promotion on fresh produce for me? I just want to be sure I'm not stretching our budget too thin. Of course, Mr. C. Maddie quickly checked the screen. Yep, all fresh produce, including proteins, is 15% off today. And that's on top of your veteran discount. Relief flickered across Jimmy's face. That's good to hear. I appreciate you checking for me. But as the total climbed higher, Jimmy felt a familiar weight press down on his chest. When the fresh items alone neared $30, an uneasy feeling settled in. Maddie, I might have to put some things back depending on the final total. Hope that won't be too much trouble. Maddie glanced around. Thankfully, there was no one in line behind him. No problem at all, Mr. Carter. Take your time. Jimmy nodded gratefully as Maddie continued scanning his items, medication supplies, adult diapers, hygiene products, the essentials for Lucille's care. He braced himself for the final number, ready to apply his veteran discount, a small but crucial help for his tight budget. But then, Maddie's fingers paused on the screen. A slight frown crossed her face as she tapped again, confusion flashing in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter, she said softly, looking up at him. It looks like there's been a policy change. The system isn't letting me apply the veteran discount to feminine and hygiene products. Says here the change went into effect this morning. None of us were even told. Jimmy blinked. I'm sorry, what? His mind struggled to process it. Maddie's face was full of sympathy. I know, Mr. Carter. I'm really sorry. I had no idea about this either. A policy change overnight, with no warning? And on the very items that made the biggest difference for Lucille's daily care? Jimmy's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. It was about being able to provide for his wife. It was about the respect he had earned, respect he thought his service still meant something. He exhaled slowly. Without the discount, I won't have enough to cover the total, he admitted, his voice tight. I'll have to cancel all the fresh produce. Maddie's movements were slow, almost hesitant, as she began removing the items from his total. It was as if she was hoping a solution would appear. Jimmy stood there, his mind racing, frustration and helplessness crashing into each other. Finally, he made a decision. Maddie, I hate to ask, but could I speak to the manager? His voice remained steady, but there was a firm edge to it. I just want to understand why this change was made so suddenly, without a word to customers like me. I get the store's newsletter, the weekly catalog, so why didn't I hear anything about this? Maddie hesitated, looking uneasy, but eventually nodded. Of course, Mr. Carter. I'll call for Dale Johnson right away. He's our new manager. She reached for the intercom, her voice carrying across the store as she requested the manager to the checkout. As they waited, Jimmy took a slow breath, trying to brace himself. He had a feeling this conversation wasn't going to go the way he hoped. He mentally ran through what he would say, preparing for what was likely to be an uphill battle. Then, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching made him look up. A man in his late 30s strode toward them, an air of confidence, or was it arrogance, surrounding him. His dyed blue hair stood in sharp contrast to the store's muted color scheme. This must be Dale Johnson. As Dale stopped in front of him, Jimmy took one look at his expression and knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. It was about to become something much bigger. And neither of them knew that someone very important was watching, someone who was about to change everything. Dale's presence was anything but humble, and as he sized Jimmy up with an impatient look, the discomfort in Jimmy's gut grew. I'm Dale Johnson, the manager, the man said, his tone clipped and condescending. Is there a problem here? Jimmy took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm and respectful. Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. I'm James Carter, a regular customer here at Everyday Essentials. I wanted to discuss the recent change in your veteran discount policy for hygiene products. Dale's gaze narrowed as he looked Jimmy up and down, his eyes lingering on the rows of badges proudly displayed on Jimmy's uniform. "What about it?" he asked, his tone dismissive. Jimmy pressed on, undeterred. "Well, sir, I've been using the veteran discount for these essential items for years. They're vital for my wife's care. This sudden policy change has made them financially out of reach for us. I was hoping there might be a way to reconsider this decision, if not immediately, then at least in the future. A little notice would help customers like me plan better." Dale let out a harsh laugh, a sound that echoed through the quiet store. "Reconsider? Listen, old man, this isn't a farmer's market. New management, new rules. No bargaining. If you can't afford it, shop somewhere else." Jimmy's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. He could feel the eyes of other customers on him now, drawn by the escalating tension. But he kept his voice steady. "Mr. Johnson, I understand businesses need to make changes, but many veterans rely on these discounts for essentials like medical and hygiene supplies. We've served this country, and this small consideration goes a long way. Everyday Essentials has built a reputation for supporting veterans. That's why we keep coming back. Changing this without warning feels like a step away from what this store has stood for." Dale's demeanor shifted, and his dismissive tone was replaced by something uglier. "Served your country?" he sneered. "Let me tell you something, washed-up veteran, your kind should never have been allowed to serve in the first place. This country doesn't need help from people like you." Jimmy's heart skipped a beat as he processed the vile words. He looked Dale dead in the eye, his voice sharp with disbelief. "My kind?" he echoed. "Do you mean black veteran?" A stunned silence fell over the store, with a few customers now looking on, frozen. The sliding doors opened behind them as more shoppers arrived, unaware they were walking straight into the unfolding scene. Jimmy stood there, stunned, his mind struggling to process the blatant racism being thrown at him. Dale, clearly sensing the power shift, tried to recover his composure, but his words only grew more venomous. "And what are these supposed to be?" Dale asked, pointing to Jimmy's service badges, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Participation trophies? There's no way someone like you could have earned real honors." Jimmy's hand moved to the badges instinctively, each one a symbol of the sacrifices he and countless others had made. "These badges represent years of service and sacrifice, Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're a testament to the dedication of all who serve, regardless of their race. Surely, as an American, you can appreciate the importance of honoring our veterans." Dale's face contorted in rage. "Appreciate?" he spat. "I'll show you what I appreciate." Before Jimmy could react, Dale shoved him hard, sending him stumbling backward toward the exit doors. Jimmy's military-honed reflexes kicked in just in time. He steadied himself, narrowly avoiding a car speeding past in the loading zone. His heart raced as he swatted Dale's hand away from his shoulder, his breathing coming in short bursts. Dale stepped back, his face twisting into something colder and more sinister. Standing in the doorway, Dale grinned smugly. "That's what you get for trying to humiliate me in front of my customers," he sneered. "Don't come back here, old man. You're not welcome anymore." With that, Dale turned and stormed back into the store, leaving Jimmy standing alone outside. A mix of anger, humiliation, and deep sadness washed over him as he stood there, processing everything that had just happened. The bustling parking lot faded away as the weight of the encounter settled on his chest. How could this happen? In the very country he had fought so hard to protect? The sun beat down on Jimmy as he leaned against the store's wall, struggling to catch his breath. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, hurt, confusion, and anger, all competing for attention. His usually stoic demeanor faltered as memories of his time in the Gulf War resurfaced, the camaraderie, the sacrifices, the unwavering belief that they were fighting for a better world. But how could that world include people like Dale, people who seemed to embody everything they had fought against? Jimmy's breath slowed, but the pain of what had just occurred stayed with him. He had served his country with honor, only to be met with hatred and disrespect in the place he thought he could trust. The day was far from over, and the battle he had faced in that store wasn't the only fight he would have to endure. Brimming with the very essentials Jimmy had struggled to purchase. For a moment, Jimmy thought his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him. Morgan Freeman? Here? The actor's expression was one of quiet determination, his deep, commanding voice carrying warmth and sincerity. "Mr. Carter, I couldn't just stand by and watch that happen," he said, offering the bags to Jimmy. "This isn't right. Not in my America." Jimmy, still stunned, instinctively reached out, his hands gripping the bags as he searched for words. "Mr. Freeman, I don't know what to say." Morgan placed a firm hand on Jimmy's shoulder, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to say anything. You've already said enough with your service, your dignity. It's people like him that don't understand what real sacrifice looks like." Jimmy swallowed hard, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. For years, he had endured the struggles that came with being a veteran, a black man, and a husband trying to do right by his wife. But today, in the face of blatant hatred, someone had stood up for him, not just anyone, but Morgan Freeman himself. "I saw what happened back there," Morgan continued, glancing back toward the store, his voice tinged with disappointment. "And I wasn't the only one." Jimmy followed his gaze and realized that a small crowd had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves, some recording on their phones. Dale Johnson had humiliated himself without even realizing it. "I don't need thanks," Morgan said with a soft chuckle. "Just take these home to your wife. She's waiting for you." Jimmy, a man who had seen the horrors of war and the depths of human cruelty, found himself moved to tears. He gripped Morgan's hand firmly, shaking it with the respect and gratitude words couldn't quite capture. "Thank you," he finally managed. For standing up." Morgan nodded, his expression unreadable for a moment before he gave Jimmy a reassuring smile. "That's what we're supposed to do for each other." As Jimmy turned toward the bus stop, carrying the groceries that meant so much more than just supplies, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. And behind him, Morgan Freeman watched, knowing that a small act of kindness had just left a lasting impact on a man who had given so much for his country. Morgan Freeman took it all in, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with quiet understanding. Jimmy set the bags down on the kitchen table, feeling an odd mix of pride and embarrassment. This was his reality, his home, his struggles, his love for Lucille, all laid bare before one of the most famous men in the world. Lucille, hearing the commotion, called out from the back room. "Jimmy? That you?" Her voice, though weak, carried the warmth of a woman who had spent a lifetime loving one man. Jimmy hurried to her side, his worry from earlier flooding back. "Yeah, baby, it's me," he said, taking her frail hand in his. "I brought a guest." Lucille's tired eyes flickered toward the doorway, and when she saw who stood there, her breath hitched. "Oh, my lord," she whispered. "Morgan Freeman?" Freeman stepped forward with that same warm smile, nodding gently. "Yes, ma'am. And it's a true pleasure to meet you." Lucille looked from Freeman to Jimmy, confusion and amusement playing across her face. "Jimmy, what in the world is going on?" Jimmy chuckled, shaking his head. "Long story, sweetheart. But let's just say, an angel showed up today." Morgan let out a soft chuckle of his own. "Hardly an angel, ma'am," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just a man who saw something that shouldn't have happened and decided to do something about it." Lucille's eyes glistened as she squeezed Jimmy's hand. "You see? There are good people left in this world." Freeman's gaze swept the room once more, taking in the sacrifices, the resilience, the love that filled the space. He cleared his throat slightly, as if pushing down an emotion of his own. "I want you both to know something," he said. "Your struggles, your sacrifices, they don't go unseen. People like Dale, they think they hold power, but they don't. Real power is what's in this room. The love. The service. The dignity that no man can take from you. Jimmy swallowed hard, nodding. He had fought wars, faced death, endured hardships most people couldn't imagine. And yet, it was this moment, this validation, that nearly broke him. Lucille looked at the groceries, then back at Freeman. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means more than you know." Morgan shook his head. "It's just groceries," he said. "But if it helps, then I'm glad." Jimmy exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The humiliation of earlier, the weight of Dale's words, it all seemed to fade. In their place was something stronger, dignity, respect, and a reminder that no matter how dark the world could be, there were still lights shining in it. As Freeman stepped back toward the door, he turned to Jimmy with a knowing look. "I have a feeling this isn't the last time we'll see each other," he said. Jimmy smiled. "I hope not." With a final nod, Morgan Freeman walked out into the fading sunlight, leaving behind a home filled with gratitude, hope, and the unshakable belief that kindness, real, powerful kindness, could change the course of a man's day, or even his life. Morgan Freeman took in the modest home, his expression filled with quiet respect. Jimmy called out to Lucille, his voice tinged with concern. She responded weakly from the bedroom, worried about his long absence. As Jimmy entered with Freeman behind him, Lucille's eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Freeman," she gasped, attempting to sit up. "Welcome to our home." Freeman smiled warmly. "Mrs. Carter, it's an honor. Your husband told me about you on the way here. I hope you don't mind my visit." Lucille turned to Jimmy, bewildered. "What happened? Why is Mr. Freeman here? Did you do something?" Jimmy chuckled and took her hand. "It's a long story, but Morgan helped me today." As Jimmy recounted the ordeal at Everyday Essentials, Freeman sat nearby, listening intently. When Lucille thanked him for helping her husband, he simply replied, "You're most welcome." Their conversation turned personal, with Lucille revealing her struggles with multiple sclerosis and the challenges they faced affording medical care. Freeman's expression softened. "I understand. Progressive MS is relentless. The right support makes all the difference." Jimmy sighed. "It's tough. The costs keep rising, and some days, I feel like I'm barely holding it together." Lucille squeezed his hand. "It's not just the physical strain, Jimmy. I see the toll it takes on you." After sharing a quiet moment, Freeman declined Jimmy's offer of coffee, explaining he had to leave. But at the door, he turned back. "Thanks for your service. I'll settle the rest for you." Jimmy, unsure of what he meant, simply nodded, still processing the day. Later that night, as he helped Lucille with her care, he realized they were low on essential supplies, particularly the anti-decubitus cushion she needed. He decided to try a nearby medical store, but found it out of stock. That left only one option, going back to Everyday Essentials. Despite his unease, Jimmy returned, only to find the store surrounded by press. Reporters buzzed about major policy changes and veteran rights. And at the center of it all stood Morgan Freeman. When Freeman spotted Jimmy, he excused himself from the reporters and approached. "Glad to see you here, Mr. Carter." Overwhelmed, Jimmy simply said, "Thank you. I never expected anything like this." Freeman nodded. "No one should be treated the way you were. That won't happen again, not here, and hopefully not anywhere else." Inside, the store had changed. Staff treated Jimmy with newfound respect, and Dale Johnson, the disgraced manager, was nowhere in sight. As he picked up the cushion for Lucille, Freeman handed him a sealed envelope. "Read this later," he said gently. Back home, Jimmy opened the letter, his hands trembling. Inside was a heartfelt message recognizing the failures and how veterans are treated, and a check for $80,000. Lucille gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "Jimmy, is this real?" He nodded, overcome with emotion. "It's real, sweetheart." They sat in stunned silence before bursting into relieved laughter. The weight of their struggles suddenly felt lighter. To celebrate, Jimmy made fresh apple-carrot ginger juice, a rare treat. As they sipped together, he whispered, "Things are going to be easier now." Lucille squeezed his hand. "Jimmy, you deserve this. After everything you've given, it's about time someone gave back." As the evening sun cast a golden glow over their home, Jimmy realized the day that began in humiliation had ended in dignity and hope. And outside, across the country, a conversation had begun, one that would change how America treats its heroes.